What happens when the craziest, most unbelievable stories, the ones you just laugh off, turn out to be real? Documented government-run operations? Well, let's dive into that very unsettling reality.
We've all heard them, right? Theories about secret groups pulling all the strings, shadowy plots unfolding just out of sight. It's so easy to just dismiss them as crazy talk. But what if history shows us that sometimes, just sometimes, the truth is way, way crazier than any story? There's a reason these theories are so appealing. On a psychological level, they offer a simple answer for a world that feels really chaotic. They give us a clear us versus them, a bad guy to blame for really complex problems. It's just human nature to look for patterns, to want a sense of control. And look, let's be real, skepticism is the way to go, for sure. The vast majority of these theories completely fall apart under any real scrutiny. They are just stories, and separating fact from fiction is absolutely crucial. But, and this is where things get really uncomfortable, some of them don't fall apart. When you start digging into declassified documents, into historical records, you find government programs that sound like they were pulled straight from a Hollywood spy thriller. And that's the point where they stop being theories and start being cold, hard, documented history.
Let's kick things off with a big one, maybe the most infamous of them all, Project MKUltra. Now, this wasn't some fringe idea cooked up in a basement. No, this was a top-secret CIA program, and its goal was one of the most terrifying things you can imagine: controlling the human mind. The whole thing was born out of pure Cold War paranoia. The CIA was absolutely terrified that the Soviets were getting ahead on brainwashing techniques. So their answer wasn't just to play defense. Oh no, they wanted to build their own offensive mind control weapons. I mean, the goals were pure science fiction. We're talking truth serums, creating sleeper agents you could activate with a word, even erasing memories. And the methods they used, they were just as brutal as the goal. The guy in charge, a CIA chemist named Sidney Gottlieb, basically launched an all-out assault on a person's mind. They were using powerful drugs like LSD, a lot of times on people who had no idea what was happening. They combined that with high-intensity electroshock and just locking people away in total sensory deprivation. The whole idea was to shatter someone's personality completely so they could try and rebuild it how they wanted. So who were the guinea pigs for this nightmare experiment? Well, they went after the most vulnerable people they could find. We're talking prisoners, patients in mental health facilities, people who couldn't fight back, who didn't even know they were part of an experiment. This wasn't some abstract program. It had a real devastating human cost, like Harold Blower, a man who just went to a hospital for depression and was secretly injected with a deadly chemical by government researchers. And he died. But MKUltra, as horrific as it was, wasn't a one-off thing. This pattern of using regular, unsuspecting citizens as lab rats, it kept happening for decades in other government programs with just as tragic results. Just look at this timeline. This is one of the most shameful chapters in American history. For 40 years, the U.S. government studied hundreds of black men who had syphilis in Tuskegee, Alabama. They told these men they were getting free healthcare for something they called bad blood. But the real goal? It was just to watch and see what would happen if the disease was left completely untreated. And get this, in 1947, penicillin became the standard easy cure. But did they give it to the men? No. They actively withheld it for another 25 years. And the cost? It was just catastrophic. These are not just numbers. These were real people. Men died from a disease that was easily curable. They passed it on to their wives who had no idea. And children were born with it. This wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated choice made over and over again for 4 decades. And sometimes the scale of these experiments was just mind-boggling. I mean, imagine your entire city being used as a secret laboratory. That's exactly what happened in 1950. The U.S. Navy wanted to test how a city would fare in a biological attack. So they sailed a ship into the San Francisco Bay, and for a whole week, just sprayed clouds of bacteria over 800,000 people. They swore it was harmless, but it wasn't. Pneumonia cases spiked, and at least one person, a man named Edward Nevin, died as a direct result. All right, let's switch gears a bit to a story that connects the dots between a secret war in another country and a drug epidemic right here at home. This one is all about how the CIA's fight against communism in Central America may have helped light the fuse for the crack cocaine crisis. This quote from the journalist Gary Webb just says it all, doesn't it? Espionage, drug trafficking, and covert political warfare.
His reporting, a series called Dark Alliance, suggested a connection so explosive it just rocked the country and made a lot of people question everything. So what was this Dark Alliance he was talking about? Well, according to Webb's investigation, it was a pretty terrifying chain reaction. First, the CIA needs cash, off the books, to fund the Contra rebels fighting in Nicaragua. So their allies start smuggling massive amounts of cocaine into the United States to raise that money. And what happens to all that cheap cocaine? It gets cooked into crack and pumped into neighborhoods in Los Angeles, which then sparks this devastating epidemic of addiction and violence.
Webb's story created an absolute firestorm, but the official backlash was immediate and intense. Major newspapers, the ones that used to be his peers, basically worked to tear him and his story apart. His career was ruined, and the story ends in the worst way possible. In 2004, Gary Webb was found dead from 2 gunshot wounds to the head. The official ruling was suicide, which, as you can imagine, has been debated ever since. A truly tragic end for a journalist who told a story that powerful people did not want to hear. Okay, after all that heavy stuff, let's lighten it up just a little with a secret project that's, well, it's more bizarre than it is tragic. Because yes, the Pentagon really tried to build its own flying saucer. Okay, you have to love this. The dream for Project Avrocar was huge. They imagined this supersonic flying saucer that could take off straight up and intercept Soviet bombers. That was the expectation. The reality, though? It was more like a wobbly, unstable mess that could barely get more than 5 feet off the ground. It was basically a giant, super expensive air hockey puck. The dream of a supersonic saucer just never really took off. So we've gone through mind control, human experiments, secret wars, even a failed flying saucer. What's the lesson here? Where's the line between healthy skepticism and the hard truth that sometimes the craziest sounding stories are actually real? When you look at all this, the big takeaway is pretty clear. Blind trust is just not an option. We've seen that governments have betrayed that trust before, and the human cost of all that secrecy can be absolutely catastrophic. But this doesn't mean you should believe every single thing you read online. Not at all. It just means that questioning power, asking for evidence, that's not paranoia. It's actually a citizen's duty. The goal isn't to believe everything, it's to demand proof for anything. And that leaves us with one last, kind of chilling question to think about. MKUltra, Tuskegee, the Dark Alliance. All these stories only came out because of whistleblowers or declassified documents, sometimes decades after the fact. So it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If these are just the stories we know about, what stories are still out there waiting to be told?